I'm happy to welcome back Steve Welland today as we dive into the topic of diversification and upskilling. W- Welcome back, Steve.
Hello to everybody. It's good to be back.
For those who may be joining us for the first time, can you briefly share what you do and your background?
Yeah, certainly. So I'm the director of training at iRed and have been in this role, this position for probably the last 7 years. I've worked for the company for 10 and I consulted for the company for 2 years prior to that. So a 12-year history in remote sensing with iRed. And prior to that, I worked in the radio industry, um, technical radio as opposed to broadcast radio, and have flown aircraft, however you want to describe them, UAVs, UAS, drones, radio control aircraft for about the last 35 years. So I'm older than I look, but yeah, I've been flying for a long time.
With a pretty incredible background. So let's start today's topic. I'm really excited to get into diversification and upskilling. And, you know, the thing that gets me, and I see this everywhere, is like there are somebody who gets their advanced pilot's license, and that can be GVC in the UK, your advanced RPAS license in Canada, or Part 107 in the US. And then the question that everyone asks is, so what now? How do I make a business with this? This is a commercial license. How do I do something with this? This question is the very reason behind the drone mentor, but the reality is that although these certifications can make you legal to fly, it doesn't really guarantee that you'll have the skills that are in demand. Starting from square one is really daunting. You don't really know where to go, what to do, and a lot of people just usually start with gathering aerial video and photographs, getting used to the camera on the drone. And this works for a lot of people, but there are also a lot of players, and there's a lot of competition, and sometimes it can feel like a race to the bottom. What in-demand skills do you recommend investing in that can make someone stand out in the crowd and diversify their offerings in a meaningful way?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question that I'm asked pretty much 4 or 5 times every single day. Um, you know, Working for a training company that supports upwards of 20,000 people a year, um, you're going to get 5 or 6 questions every single day about how I drive my business forward, where do I need to invest, what equipment do I need to buy, etc., etc. It is a tough question to answer, and I think from to benefit everybody, I think it's probably the best way to answer it is how we have done it as a company that's been in the remote sensing game for 25 years. iRed as a company have been a ground-based remote sensing company for 25 years. We've been training for 20. And obviously, the minute that we could put a sensor on the bottom of an aerial platform, that's what we had to do. So it goes right the way back to putting two bits of stick together and attaching some sort of electric motors and seeing whether it would fly. Because ultimately, an aerial perspective is a fantastic perspective to have. Across the board in application, everything from a standard photograph of the ground to understanding thermal, multispectral, hyperspectral, and so on. The application for the use of airborne platforms is huge, um, because it's become a small platform that can be flown low to the ground, which then nets us high resolution remote sensing and data. Doesn't matter whether it's a photograph or even audio, ground penetrating radar, all of this stuff is now high resolution as opposed to being, aviation height, 1,500 feet and above, or satellite. So it's a question that I get asked quite a lot. I would say, first and foremost, for everybody in the drone industry that wants to fly a drone using a camera of some description, regardless of what type of camera. And I use the term camera very lightly. I'm not talking about necessarily RGB. I'm also talking about something that's non-visual. Okay. I would suggest the first thing to get your head around, if you haven't already, and a lot of people do come from a photography background. That's great because they've got to step up. Anybody that's in the photography world coming into using an airborne platform to gather photography and videography, they understand the technical principles behind photography. Those are absolutely paramount to understand. We have, and if you understand photography, if you understand how light works, then you understand how the electromagnetic spectrum works, and then you can broaden your horizons. Okay, photography, combining the principles of photography and the techniques, is effectively art. We take pictures, and subjectively, that's art. You might not be in the business of art. We as a company at iRed are not in the business of art. Okay, we are a data collection company, and we collect data in all forms of the electromagnetic spectrum, including visual light. Okay, we couldn't get away with not understanding how a camera captures light. Start with that fundamental, and then we understand all other remote sensings, right to gas fine spectroscopy. Okay, it's all understanding the electromagnetic spectrum. So understand photography, you will understand quite a lot of everything else. You can get away with understanding photography without understanding the electromagnetic spectrum. Okay, but you are getting away with it, because if you broaden your horizons beyond what we see with our eyes, you have to understand the electromagnetic spectrum. You have to understand radiation, light, photons, etc., things that we can't see. So that's where I would always start. I'd start in that realm, firstly. But of course, once you've learned that to a certain degree, and of course we don't have to be scientists, we have to have a level of understanding that allows us to capture data, understand what we're capturing, and then deliver that to whoever's asked us to do that job. And of course, we can consider the photography, the light capturing and non-visual capturing with regard to photogrammetry. Okay, the act of image matching and creating an orthomosaic or a 3D model or a point cloud, etc., which is big business at the moment. If we talk about these in priority, photogrammetry over and above videography for TV and photography for art, photogrammetry is probably our second largest money earner. Understanding photography allows you to sort of delve into those realms. LiDAR, which is an expensive way to go, but it's becoming cheaper. It's becoming more open to people that don't have a large budget. And of course, it gains you some fantastic data. Multispectral and hyperspectral and thermal imaging is where that's our primary money earner. And a lot of people are quite surprised at that because it's quite a niche market, but we make more money from multispectral thermal imaging and hyperspectral work than we would do from anything else. We can trip into nowadays with the fantastic technology that we have now, that multispectral and thermal imaging becomes part of photogrammetry. So you can see where photogrammetry is going to always fall second, because photogrammetry is both RGB and non-visual. And I'll give you some examples of that in a moment. And then finally, we've got NDVI, for example, multispectral analysis. So these are areas of, if you understand photography in the multispectral, the electromagnetic spectrum, you can widen your horizons to different sensors. So let me just share my screen quickly to give you some examples. Okay, hopefully you can see my screen now.
I can see it.
Good. So the first one I'm going to open up is this difference, just so everybody's understanding what I'm talking about when I'm talking about RGB, multispectral, and hyperspectral. We are just talking about different wavelengths of light being captured separately. So RGB does the same thing. We capture RGB in our photography and our videography in the RGB spectrum, red, green, and blue, and then of course they're put together in to give us a nice colored image. We can take that a step further with multispectral imaging. We can take that a step further by adding non-visual spectrums. What we can't see with our eyes, our sensor on certain cameras can see that. All, in fact, if we have a standard camera and we take off a particular filter, we can open that camera up to see non-visual things. Now, things exist in those non-visual spaces, which we can then identify or detect. Hyperspectral is what we commonly coin as a data cube. So multispectral is normally 5 to 10 individual spectrums of light, visual and non-visual, but we can get super clever with a hyperspectral camera that can have up to 200 layers of detail, depending on how much you want to spend on the camera, which enables us to now discover surface minerals through reflection. So, wide spectrum. Now, our drone comes with an RGB camera standard. We can now buy other drones that come with multispectral as standard, and we're increasing the cost. And hyperspectral, normally we attach that camera because it's a specialist camera to a platform and then fly that platform, but we're going up in cost quite dramatically. You would never jump feet first into hyperspectral because you'll have a camera of £100,000-ish sat on the shelf doing nothing for a long time. So you have to be very careful how you progress through this. So that's the difference between RGB, multispectral, and hyperspectral, which is, again, I said that's our biggest money earner as a company. So let me just give you an example of what that does or how we can use this. This plot that we see here is a sewage plant that we were asked to go and look at to discover some damage to the surface. It's a filter bed that people aren't allowed to stand on because they would sink, and of course it is sewage after all. So a drone becomes the absolute necessity when it comes to surveying. And we're seeing this in a multispectral band. We're looking at this in the red edge, which is a non-visual band, which will highlight some depth and moisture reflections to a higher standard than an RGB camera. So what you're seeing here, some of it isn't visible in the RGB. But if we then look at the IR image that we've taken from a multispectral camera, we can see that it shows, taken at the same time, a completely different data set. And if we look at the middle portion of the image, we can see the number 14, which there's no straight lines in nature, and nobody writes the number 14 on 100 acres of land. So having discovered this, the client asked us what it was, and that's not for us to answer. So we did suggest to the client that they go back historically and have a look at something that was mechanically taken place. And this was a trench system that was dug in 1977, and the survey was done in 2019, 2020. So we were able to discover a trench system that is not visual, which enabled the customer to understand why the sewage plant was damaged. Okay, so this will give you a good example of what you can see in the non-visual if you've got the right sensor. Okay, so I just wanted to give you an example, because when we talk about multispectral imaging or thermal imaging or hyperspectral imaging, there's never anything to see. There's never anything to show. And I think this clearly shows that light reflects differently in the different spectrums, and what you might not be able to see with your eyes, you can most certainly see with something that sees outside of that spectrum. Once you have the raw data like this, we can then index, we can use tuning techniques to show other errors. So one of the other tasks that we had was to show the failure in the parcel of land. And if we look at this image here, we've indexed by coloring them red all of the damaged channels that are running across the land. And if you look at the sort of central part where you can see these red channels here, this is, again, not visual to the naked eye. And we can see it traversing in. So there's some examples of how or why multispectral, hyperspectral, and RGB sensors are our biggest money. So I thought that was important before we sort of moved on. I've got one more to show.
Absolutely.
If we invest in our time to understand the technologies, we can reverse engineer the technology. We can use them in different ways. We can use them in ways that they weren't necessarily designed to be used. So what we're looking at here is a video, and I'll play the video in a minute. Effectively, what we have is a thermal camera looking down at the ground, a forensic site where a rifle has been discharged, and the police need to search for the round or the spent casing, which of course would take 50 officers all day long on a large area. The casing is made out of brass. Brass is a highly reflective material in the infrared. It doesn't tell you its temperature. The thermal camera could never tell you the temperature of the brass casing. The brass casing will always reflect what we call a cold sky, or will have a cold sky influence. So what we're seeing there, which is unnatural, is we have an ambient temperature where the red dot is of 21 degrees. That's the temperature of the ground. And just to the right of that red dot, we can see something is at 0.4 of a degree on a 21-degree day. Well, that's not natural, okay? So that is obviously something. Well, if you understand how brass works in the infrared, that's our shell casing. We don't need to see it. We just need to understand the data that it's going to show, or its spectral response. So if I show you the video, we ask the guy to go in and point out where the round is. So we've got a guy entering shot now that's going to find there. And you can see the temperature increased. That's his influence as he walked closer. So he's reflecting in the brass casing. Okay. And then this is another situation where it's slightly warmer in different conditions. We can see now that the ambient temperature is closer to 30 degrees, and we have the brass casing still at 7 degrees, which is way lower than anything should be. If he turns the casing on its end, you can see now the temperature drops to below 0. This is not an image. You can't take an image of this ground and expect to find a brass casing from a rifle. But if you understand infrared and you understand how the environment will affect that brass casing, you can easily find a brass casing with a thermal camera on a drone over a forensic site, as we've proven here. So I just wanted to show those 3 or 4 things, just to sort of make sure we all understand what we're talking about when it comes to upskilling and investing time and money into both equipment and training. Okay. Before we move on to the next question, if you can still see my screen, hopefully, I'm going to just show you how quickly, this is a roof inspection that we have carried out to look for moisture ingress, which is I like to call it money for old rope. Okay. If I could do 5 surveys a week, charging in the region of 2 to 3K for the survey, that'd be happy. It takes 15 minutes to do this survey, and of course, all it needs is experience and understanding when it comes to analysis. So what you're seeing here is an image that has been captured by a drone from a thermal camera, and it shows absolutely nothing of interest. I could not go to a client and say, your roof is damaged, you need to repair your roof, or you need to replace your roof. But in actual fact, there's so much detail in this image. And this is because every image we capture from a thermal camera, ground-based or thermal, has to be tuned. What we're seeing there is live information taken in all of the temperatures in the scene. The trees, the temperatures of reflective stainless steel. We have a broad what we call span of temperatures from -60 all the way up to whatever the ambient temperature plus is, somewhere in the region of 30 degrees on this image. So this is not showing you what it needs to show you. So you have to tune the image. So firstly, the choice is to choose the correct palette. A common misconception with thermal is somebody has to, or the camera chooses the colors, or, red is hot and blue is cold. That's not true. The thermographer, the person that edits the image, the person that analyzes the image, is the person that chooses the colors for that. So I could choose Ironbow, which is a common choice on thermal images. But this palette was chosen specifically or designed specifically 20 plus years ago to look at high voltage, high resistance temperature faults on an electrical circuit. It is not a useful palette for looking at moisture ingress on a rooftop. I can, if I squint, and if the audience squints, they can see areas of higher temperature, which you could conclude that there might be something to do with moisture ingress there. But that's just a small 10%, 15% of what's needed. If I change it to the correct palette for this particular, which is what we call a high contrast palette, doesn't matter about the colors, they naturally fall into the rainbow palette, but it needs to be high contrast. It needs to be only 64 shades of color. We can see straight away by choosing a different palette, we can see now much more than we did in the first place. So I can now see and target areas of interest here that would say to me that's moisture ingress. Okay. I now need to tune the image to find where that moisture ingress is, which I can do very easily by narrowing the scale. So I'm just going to literally slide the scale together. What this does is increases the contrast and decreases the span of temperatures that I'm looking at. At the moment, I'm looking at only about 5 degrees. If I quickly move that around to the point where I can see the hottest temperature, here, where I've placed my mouse, is the actual hole in the rooftop where the water is getting in. So I can now direct my client to that point to repair that leak. Okay. And that's just because I've been able to tune the image and I understand infrared. Hopefully, this demonstration, this example, gives a much better understanding as to why, if you buy a thermal camera or a drone with a thermal camera on it, you really must try to get your head around how infrared works. Okay. And it goes for all sensors, multispectral, hyperspectral, LiDAR, even photogrammetry, because doing photogrammetry in the wrong conditions nets you a bad map and a bad model. Okay.
And I bet you run into that a lot in your line of work, where somebody thinks they can just point a thermal camera and they've given the client bad data, and you've had to come in and kind of help or support that, or
Yeah.
explain to a client after having something like that. So it really serves everyone to understand that this is a highly skilled capability, but it's also high in demand once you get that skill set under
Yeah, I
control.
think what we tend to have, and people do come to us for help a lot of the time. What we tend to have is a client asks for a job, this particular job, for example, and then the guys go out and capture it as best they can. They put the drone up in the air at the height they think is correct. They take an image. What that normally nets them is what you saw before. Okay, if I click on auto and go back to let's say Ironbow, that's what would happen when they press the trigger. That's what they get.
Right.
They then have to explain to the client where the moisture ingress is, and the client's always going to say, well, where can I fix it? Where's the leak? Yeah. And they
Yeah,
would say,
that's
well,
what they care
we
about.
don't really know. It's somewhere on there. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So then they would, quite often, the disastrous part is their invoice doesn't get paid. The client is unhappy with the data that's been collected and passed over. And at that point, they have to then go out to somebody to help them out, or completely, accept the fact that they're not going to get paid and stop the job. So we find ourselves helping people saying, that's fine, give us the image, and we do what I just showed you, and then give that back, and then they can go off and claim their money. We've had that numerous times. You would much prefer to have to be able to understand it yourself and make sure the data gets across properly. And a lot of people don't even realize that it's that simple. A free piece of software with a well-taken image in the right conditions means that the job's quick and easy. And as I said, money for old rope. Okay. So hopefully that first question, and I don't want to run out of time, but I do think this is quite important. The first question's been answered well.
Yeah, very
You should.
thoroughly and very thoroughly. I think I think you have to spend time on that. You have to understand what we're talking about when we're talking about upskilling. And I think the second part of that question is like, okay, you can see what it does. You can see in these very specific examples. So now people are thinking perhaps too narrowly about where the markets are for this. So then my next question is, we're inundated with these types of technologies. We're seeing it all the time, and especially with the data collection opportunities that are out there. And then, but most technologies like thermal imaging isn't really built for a predefined market. It's kind of you can figure out the market where you're looking at. And on the flip side of that, there are some technologies out there that are so new that they don't even have a valid market yet. But where is the real market demand? And where do you see it trending in the near future and
Yeah, great.
beyond?
Again, tough question to answer when we've got such a diverse industry.
Yeah.
Um, the areas that we cover, I hate to say it, but the term jack of all trades, master of none always springs to mind. Of course, we can specialize. If you're a surveyor and you've had a lifetime of surveying and you're using a drone to get that aerial perspective or to make your life slightly easier when it comes to data collection of certain types, then that's your market. You're already a successful surveyor. So you're just adding a tool to your quiver effectively. But that's not the average guy that does his GVC and wants to start a drone business doesn't tend to know where he's going to specialize to start with. Um, the problem, of course, is there's no one drone, there's no one sensor. So the money becomes, it gets out of control if you're going to be a jack of all trades. If you're going to be a jack of all trades, the expense is massive. And then, of course, you buy a Mavic 3 thermal last year, and then they bring out the Mavic 4 thermal this year. And we all know, the gears are right. Let me just say, when it comes to thermal cameras, you could quite happily buy an Inspire if you could deal with flying it. An Inspire and a 10-year-old thermal camera, and it'd be exactly the same quality as what you could get out of the 4T in terms of radiometric thermal imagery. The image you just saw was an image taken with a 12-year-old camera. So there's that. So you've got to be very careful. But of course, we always like the new stuff, and there's always new features. The new
The
features
new, the shiny.
are going to be the AI functions and features and the faster capture of data, the slightly better resolution of certain cameras. So that's a personal choice. My advice to anybody would be to steer yourself down a path that you can see clearly in terms of market, like you say. So what do we think the market is? Well, we're not into TV and video. Okay, we never have been. It's not our bag. We would probably not entertain it. When we talk about jack of all trades, we wouldn't even entertain. We would probably pass that work off to somebody else when it comes to TV and video. TV and video is peaks and troughs as far as I'm concerned with people I know in the industry. You hear of them being busy one minute and not busy the next, saturated one minute, and then everybody disappears, and then there's work available. So it is peaks and troughs. We are in the industrial world, okay, the inspections world. And currently, with the carbon neutral, carbon zero push, building surveys, inspections, whether it be thermal or RGB, is a daily occurrence. It's work happening every day. Now, unfortunately, for the guy that thinks that he can specialize in RGB when it comes to building surveying, we're talking about EPC, we're talking about heat loss, we're talking about retrofit for for carbon neutral environments. So, for example, we had a job for 3,000 homes in Liverpool, which required a database of heat loss surveys data. Great contract to have, bread and butter when it comes to thermal. Didn't just need the thermal expertise. It required, because they wanted to bolt on digital twinning. Okay, so although the inquiry came at us as a thermal job, it also included expertise or specialist work when it came to RGB, photogrammetry, etc. And we were even asked only a couple of weeks ago, after doing the river survey, a thermal river survey for LiDAR, okay, for a certain area, and ground penetrating radar. So you can see how quickly, if you're just somebody that does RGB, that people add on stuff. My recommendation is none of us could afford to buy all the equipment required. There are plenty of services out there that would allow you to hire the equipment for the job that you needed. For example, we don't have a ground penetrating radar system because they change quite frequently and technology moves on and they're becoming better and better. So putting £100,000 of GPR on the shelf is probably not a good idea. So we rented that equipment from a provider. The issue here is if you don't have the ability to operate that equipment or the skills required to analyze that equipment, doesn't matter where you hire it from, it doesn't work. So we make sure that we're skilled in the capture of the data, but hire the equipment when we need it. And we've done that before with another expensive piece of kit for a ground-based gas find situation on fuel and oil sites, where we need to go and look for carbon gases. The equipment is in the region of £150,000. So again, you'd put that on the shelf. So with regard to the common work, as we've said, I would say we would start with buildings. Okay, if you think about domestic and commercial buildings, that's where the work lies. Roof inspections, thermal inspections of the building, understanding heat loss of the building. Okay, so that's where most of our income comes from. Secondly to that, I would say that the add-ons that we get when we ask to do these surveys, so photogrammetry, orthomosaics of land, volumetrics for sites, building sites, for example, looking at movement of materials. Those are jobs that we would consider second to the built environment. And then really it's throw 50 darts at a dartboard with regard to other things. Recently, we've done everything from thermal surveys of curlews, nesting curlews. We've done other environmental surveys using a thermal camera, a river survey for groundwater ingress, and it goes on. These are very specialist inquiries that come in because we're a remote sensing company. So yeah, I'd say buildings, urban industrial buildings is probably where the main push comes from. And what do you need for that? You need a good drone. You need an understanding of photogrammetry. You need good sensors to go with that photogrammetry. And then the thermal side of it is relatively cheap now. You can buy the Mavic 3T, for example, for 5 or 6K, and you've got a drone that does quite a bit of what we've just talked about in one drone. So that's where I'd say that.
Yeah. So there are really levels on how you can when you start to dip your toe into remote sensing capabilities, and you're moving away from that photography, and you can start there, but then you can start building gradually over time. There's also a case to be made for, if you don't have a specialty, you can find somebody and you can partner with them in order to add and go after some of those bigger uh, types of work.
Yeah,
I'm guessing.
we do see that
Yeah.
quite a lot. I have a lot of guys that come through for their thermography training, and they're always partnered with somebody else that's got a different skill. So we see a lot of guys that partner again because the equipment's very expensive. So we've got guys that specialize in photogrammetry and the survey side, where they're probably qualified surveyors, and then they go out and find somebody that's got the right equipment for thermal because they're always being asked to do the two things together. So you're right. There's quite a lot of joining of skills.
And iRed is a very good partner for that, for anyone who's been approached for that. We also have a services capability in the UK and also in North America.
Yeah.
Um, so, you're talking about a lot of skills to build. So I'm going to use the term they say that Rome wasn't built in a day. And the skills you've covered can take a lot of time to master.
Yeah.
Getting into these markets can be a challenge in itself. You have to kind of there's some proving ground there. You know, people are wanting to make sure that they're getting good data, especially if they've ever gotten bad data before. What are the realistic timelines and demands people should be aware of if they decide to take this route and start building up their skill set in
Yeah,
remote
I think
sensing?
that's the guys I've spoken to quite recently in the last few days, because again, this is a continuing inquiry line for guys that want to upskill. They want to know how much time do they have to take off work. We've all got a day job, and committing to a 2 week course just doesn't fit very well. So it's quite important to try and tailor the courses to fit industry. And of course, these aren't educational courses where you can just commit to 3 months, 6 months, or a year's worth of training, 2 hours a night. It just doesn't fit very well. So every course that we run at iRed, for example, and I imagine this is the same for most other training companies as well, is going to fit in that 1 week. And if we need to advance up, if we need to have a basic course to start with, then that's most certainly the route to go. Because you can get most of what you want, but you can start earning money with the basic course, and then you can upskill again when you get time and funds. You can upskill to that advanced. So the idea of a basic and advanced course in two very small slots is much more beneficial to people that want to earn money. Again, realistically, you can't learn everything, or certainly not in a quick space of time. I have had a couple of guys recently ask that they want to understand photogrammetry, but they don't just want to understand RGB photogrammetry. So they want to understand multispectral, and they want to understand if you can include thermal into that into that photogrammetry way. And currently, with the equipment that we have and the software that we have, you can actually, for the first time in a long time, you can actually include both multispectral and thermal into a good understanding of photogrammetry. So we should be having a basic course that covers it all, okay? Because again, people find it difficult to invest in just RGB photogrammetry and then having to come back and do multispectral photogrammetry, coming back to do thermal photogrammetry, for example. That is too much time and unnecessary. So we try to have a 5-day course, let's say, that shows you everything you need to know to the point where you're going to make money. And then if you need to specialize in the future, or there's an advancement that you require, a level 1 or a level 2, then you've got time and prospect to do that in the future. So that's the way that I recommend that to be done. It's a careful consideration. None of these courses, no matter where you go, are cheap, because these are specialist subjects that can't be taught in 5 minutes. And I would always recommend, I'm a great fan of e-learning, but there are certain courses that require a practical input, and these
Yep,
need a practical input. Yeah, if you don't do
absolutely.
this, it's very difficult to learn it properly. So we call that
Absolutely.
blended learning, don't we? Where you do both.
Yeah, I think we do blended.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
blended learning is the way to go because you can do your own time theory learning and then there's a practical element to it. And maybe that can cut down on the amount of time you're taking off work to do these types of courses.
Yeah, so trainers, if anyone's looking to become somebody who supports people to get in there, yeah, it's really you have to understand the type of people coming to us to take these courses. And there's a lot involved and you have to make it available to them and hybrid learning, as you said, the big thing where you can get some of the theory down before you go into the course to get the hands-on thing. So we're talking about a lot of stuff that might all of a sudden be overwhelming and demanding. Um, Seeing what's involved, the money, the time, the effort, and it can seem like a gamble or a risk when you're running a business. But one of the things I'd like to emphasize is that you can really make a calculated risk for your business and invest in your skills if to grow your business and to make it make sense for your business that you've already kind of started. And if you've gone through the course or have started going through the course, you'll remember that there's a major lesson point that or through line, and that is we guide everyone through identifying your product by looking at your experience, your connections, the network that you have, and your current knowledge to find where your market and your product is going to be and really kind of drilling down to the solution that you think that you can bring to the market and really diversify yourself and distinguish yourself in that market. Um, I think adding this new skill is kind of a similar process. You can't take on the world. You have to think about what you want to do to enhance your skills and where the offerings are. What are your clients asking for today? Where are they going to other people? Where do you think that you can start to add that value if you learn that skill? And what is your advice, Steve, on how people can leverage their personal strengths and their network to identify new opportunities like this?
Well, you're absolutely right that we can't take on the world, and unfortunately, well, fortunately and unfortunately, we live in a world of um, uh, social media is going to help 100%. We all know that. We're in a modern world, so if we're visible and we're showing correct, and this is where unfortunately social, and I'm sure everybody knows, if you're correct on social media, you'll get the recognition that you're hoping for. But if you throw your feet in first with not checking whether you're correct, there's a million people out there that are going to make sure they correct you. So that's quite difficult. We've got to spend time and effort making sure that our subject that we're talking about and how we're doing it is correct. I've seen so many, and I'm not one that jumps on social media and comments on anybody's post. I just can't. I'm not that person. But I have seen visibly where I think, oh, that's just not quite right. Or, somebody's gonna, and then the next thing you know that they've been pounded by the social media people where they've got something just slightly wrong. And that's what people look for, unfortunately. So my advice is make sure your subject is absolutely correct, because there's plenty of people out there that are waiting to jump on that. The other thing, of course, is that if you're a business that's been around forever and you've evolved into the marketplace, there's not really a need to be as well, you've got to work harder as a business that's new. A foot in the door is always a fantastic thing to have. So what I tend to see is for example, I have guys that produce windows. They put windows in houses. What a great foot to have in a door if you're going to look at somebody or a property for thermal heat loss. Do you see what I mean? They've already
Yeah.
got the business, they've already got the customer base. They can add that. So we've seen that in industry a lot. We have snaggers that go around and offer a service to a homeowner to create a snag list that goes back to the builder. It's common in the UK to have a snag list, 100 items long when you buy your house. And getting those fixed is sometimes a drawn out process. So snaggers come along and they do that. These have got a foot in the door. So offering a thermal survey alongside that snagging list is a absolutely sensible business decision.
Yeah.
But thermal surveys are so complex that if you don't understand what you're doing, when it comes down to the homeowner, for example, then criticizing the report, if you're unqualified or you don't understand infrared, you've got yourself in a world of hurt. And again, your business will fail because of it. So a foot in the door is a great thing to have. If you're coming from one industry and moving into drones and starting your own business, then this 20 years that you've had before is your foot in the door, and it's worthwhile having one. If you don't, then I'm afraid that you've got to work hard to show how good you are. And that might include doing certain work, gratis, creating use cases. We've done that over the last 25 years. We've done that hundreds of times. If a new application comes along, quite often the new application is not done at the full billing rate because it's a benefit to us to make sure we get it right, the process is right, the analysis right. So I can give you an example of that recently. In the last 12 months, we have formulated and actioned a tactical FPV course for emergency services and police firearms. We're all ex-military, the guys here, so we have a tactical understanding. And then, of course, we're all fantastic FPV flyers. That's part of the fun. Put those two together and make it a deliverable to the likes of the British Police Force and firearms. And, you've got a winning combination. But we didn't develop that at full cost. We had to utilize the police to help us. So they got something out of it. We got something out of it. That just gives you an idea of sometimes when there's a new application or you're new to don't dismiss the task. You should never say no, but you might not be able to charge full price because you're not experienced at it. It's that same old adage, the chicken before the egg. How do you get experience if you're not allowed to do it with no experience?
Right.
Okay. So you just got to be a bit clever in the way that you do put yourself forward for the job. You make sure that you can get yourself trained to do the job, and you might be able to offer it as a tester for both you and your client. That quite often works well. It's not a great business idea, I agree, because you're not. But this is talking about upskilling for the future. How do you get experience if you're not experienced? So you have to do that. We've done that lots of times, but we've always been at the forefront of new techniques, so that helps.
Absolutely. Staying on top of your craft, understanding where the trends are going, having a business, and what you're pointing at is building a business plan before you jump into upskilling, understanding the downtime, understanding that point and where you have your challenges there, and also understanding that you might get some loss. Can your business at this time absorb those losses if you bring in the skills, or can you afford not to if your business is going to grow? These are all questions you have to really consider before jumping right in. And John, I see you have your hand up. I'm wondering if you can put your question in the Q&A box at the bottom, and we'll be getting to the Q&A section very quickly here because I think we got overboard on this is a very deep topic and a lot of fun topics. So please feel free to do that. And we'll make sure we get those questions answered. The last bit of this, and I think this kind of ties it all together, is and leans into that idea of a business plan is, you made your decision, you've done your homework, you understand you're going to move forward. What are the practical factors you need to consider before you make that investment in time and money?
Well, I think the previous question, we can get this one done quite quickly, I think, because the previous question alluded to this. You can't bite off too much. You have to make sure that your skills are up to it. So you have to be very confident in what you can achieve and make sure you choose the right topics that you're actually go. I've had so many people that have stepped into this classroom wanting to do thermography, and then within 5 minutes of understanding the level of science that's required, have felt that they've made the wrong decision. That's their decision, of course. It doesn't happen that often, but it does happen. So you really have got to be comfortable in yourself dealing with these extra, quite heavy in science topics. Most of what we do with a drone is heavy in science. So
Very, very heavy
you
in
have to make
science.
sure you have a good understanding of what you're capable of.
Absolutely. John, if I bring you online, would you be willing to ask your question live? I'll wait for see if there's a response. We are opening up into the Q&A section. So if you have your questions, there is the Q&A box. Oh, Tom, do you have an infographic or other document describing the different pathways a drone operator can consider for their training to access these specialized markets?
We do. That's a great question. And I think what we can do, Danielle, is put that out to the guys that are on the call and anybody else that you see fit.
Yeah.
We certainly do have an infographic that advises the direction, if you know what I mean, in terms of complexity, cost, equipment requirements. So it can get quite a complex infographic, but it's still nonetheless useful.
Excellent. Um, we'll be sure to send that along to everyone in here. We have 7 minutes left. If anyone else has a question that we can help them, if this is a specific question for your business, or if there's any concerns you have while that you're trying to work through, Steve's a great person to ask those questions to. Yeah. So here's the question from John. Understood UAV Hub and iRed have partnered to deliver a stage one course. So the original spec I saw for a stage one course did not include drones. It was just buildings. So have you modified the stage one specifically for drones? And I also understood that this is a completely online offering, which isn't in line with what you said about the need for face-to-face.
Yeah, so it's a really good question, John. So as you can imagine, every customer would like their way of training. So we try and cover all of the bases. So you've got loads of choices. If we take the inconsequential e-learning courses to the side just for a moment, we have an industry standard way of understanding infrared, which is a Cat 1 and a Cat 2, Category 1 course, Category 2 course. You can think of them like level 1 and level 2, but they're not quite, just to confuse things, they're not quite level 1 and level 2. They're quite high standards. They do absolutely include the use of drones. They have to, because it covers all forms of general infrared. So that covers ground-based thermography, aerial thermography, and any other type of thermography, which will, if you look at the courses, you'll see what I mean. We have passive infrared, we have active infrared. It covers all of it. And the Cat 1 covers you to the point where you could leave your Cat 1 and work in the industry, become a level 1 Cat 1 thermographer. You could now work in the industry and be considered a thermographer. Now, not everybody wants to be qualified. Not everybody wants to do that 5-day, accredited course. So we have a introduction and we have a specialist, what we call both drone and buildings course e-learning. They're not accredited, they're unqualified, but you do learn a hell of a lot in that e-learning practice. So that's the way to think of it. If somebody wanted to dip their toe into infrared, we would invite them to have an e-learning course, which is effectively about 7 hours of learning just on the introduction to infrared, the basics of what you need to understand. If you were a building professional, for example, but didn't want to be considered accredited, you would do our TIB course, our thermography for building professionals. They both include mentions of drones in those two courses, but they don't cover the use of a drone. You'd have to come and do the level 1, level 2, Cat 1, Cat 2 courses. But we absolutely do have a qualified, accredited Cat 1 course that includes the use of drones.
Just to give you an example how that can work, I just recently talked to a client who, he's in buildings and he has the drone, the thermography drone. And, the first thing the first thing he wants to know is to get some of that theory under his belt. So we provided a scenario where we gave them the e-course where they can kind of dip their toe into it. And then we're bringing somebody in to teach them how to use the drone itself. They have the flight credentials, but maybe they need to learn how to do the drone themselves. We're doing a 1-day course there. And then finally, at the very end, they're going to do a 5-day course with Steve to do that. So is the UAV Hub a certified Cat 1 course, or do you have to come separately for that? So just to clarify that, Steve.
So if that's the UAV Hub e-learning, then it's not a certified course. You can't complete a certified course online. So yes, you would have to come and do. Now, if you completed the UAV Hub course, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to do the Cat 1 all over again. But I would suggest to become accredited, but I would suggest you did, if you wanted to be accredited, you didn't do the UAV Hub e-learning, you did a full Cat 1. I will double check that actually, John, based on the UAV Hub website, just in case there's a confusion gone on, because there may well be a slight confusion, but I'll double check that and correct anything that's incorrect. But yeah, you should really do a face-to-face Cat 1 to be certified, and you can do whatever you like e-learning, but you won't be certified.
And we'll send that information along. What are your thoughts on the use of AI in surveying and flight automation? Ooh, interesting question.
Sorry, I missed that one.
What are your thoughts of the use of AI in surveying and flight automation?
It's fantastic. So there's a couple of ways to think about this, though. And again, this could be a subject we could absolutely have just 40 minutes on.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
In our role, when it comes to remote sensing, AI now and in the future is the be all and end all. Okay. So I'll give you an example. We have 3,000 homes to survey in Liverpool. We take an image of the front and an image of the back. The front and the back will show signs of heat loss. 3,000 homes would equate to somewhere in the region of 15,000 images. I don't particularly want to look through those images. So we have a system of AI that can ping through those images and highlight the ones of a certain set of parameters, and then we can very quickly comment on that. We even have a piece of AI software that can thermally tune an image of a house automatically, which takes 2 hours of work away from myself and the likes of the other guys here. So AI, big business. Big business. Flight automation in the future, and if anybody's had a go on the 4T and the 4E, if you haven't, see if you can get a go on one, because they are unbelievable. The 4T, with its AI ability during surveying, decreases the time by a factor of 5. So because it can ping the sensor in 5 different directions and use AI to stabilize the camera, means that we can now survey the same plot of land 5 times faster and still have the same quality of image. So, and we're early days. So I'm looking forward to what's coming along.
Absolutely. One thing I do like to say with AI, because we're in early days, it doesn't replace the expertise of someone like yourself or somebody who has the background to be able to validate that data. So a lot of times we look at AI and saying, is this going to replace me? No, it can never replace. Yeah.
You've still got the guy that has to organize the flight path, or choose what time to fly. Photogrammetry is not necessarily about how quickly and easily we collect the data. But if you don't capture the data in the right conditions, and that's a human choice, not an AI
Yeah,
choice at the moment. So
always, always.
we're not replaceable just yet.
Brilliant. So we actually went a little bit over, so I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Great conversation. And Steve, again, learned so much from you. It's so always a pleasure to have you on the Q&A. This recording of the conversation will be sent out 24 hours to everyone who registered. And I look forward to seeing everyone next month for our next Q&A session. We're thinking about ideas, so if you have something that's on your mind, please feel free to email us or put it in the form. And then in the meantime, if you need help or if you're looking to diversify or you have that problem where a customer comes to you and you're looking for a special skill set, remember that the forum is available to you 24/7 for community support and networking. Again, we always welcome your feedback and on how to make this platform better. And until then, please fly safe.
Thank you very much.